All right, so for this video, I wanted to address a common question I get, which is, can I apply for my EIN for my business before the entity is actually created? Right, and so when would this arise? Well, there are some states in the U.S. where the process is quite slow to get an LLC or corporation formed. So you file the documents with the state, and a lot of times you have to wait up to 2 weeks to get the confirmation from the state that the entity is formed and legally existing and ready to go. And so then you're asking yourself, well, during that 2 week period, can I go ahead and apply for my EIN and get the EIN while I'm waiting for the LLC or the corporation to get formed? The short answer is, can you apply for it early? You can. The IRS will allow this, but in my opinion, and a lot of other practitioners agree with this, it is not recommended at all. And here's why. It's not recommended because there's always a chance that when you file the documents, the state might reject your desired name. Okay, and there's a couple of reasons why this could happen. One is it might contain some invalid characters, right? So you've got a legal entity name that just doesn't comply with the state regulations, or the name's already in use. Maybe the entity was maybe you timed it just right, where somebody else took the same name and they just got it approved, and so it didn't come up in this state name search database when you were initially looking. Very possible that that can happen. Or the entity name just contains words that are prohibited, right? So there are some let's call them offensive words that you are not allowed to have in legal entity names, depending on where you go on a state-by-state basis. And so if something like that occurs, then you have a problem. Now, what if you do decide to ignore that advice and go ahead and apply for the EIN anyway? If you apply for the EIN and ultimately it's going to have a different name than the LLC or entity that's actually formed, you now have a mismatch between what name is in the IRS database and what the legal entity name is under state law. And so that's a problem, right? So if you decide to keep the EIN, how do you update this with the IRS? Well, there's a couple of options, right? So the first thing you can do is, if you keep the EIN, when you file your first tax return for the LLC or corporation, so if it's a 1120S S Corp return, an 1120 C Corp return, or a 1065 partnership return, on page 1 there is an option to check a box for name change. And so what that will do is you check that box, you use the actual name of the entity under state law, right? So what was legally formed on the tax return. And then once the return is filed, the IRS system will update the name for that entity in the EIN database, okay? Now, if you have already filed a return and you forgot to do the name change, you can still write a letter to the IRS. So the same address where you would file the return for your company, depending on what state you live and operate the company from, you can write them a letter and explain that you just have a name change, and the IRS will update the database using that method. The last alternative is just to apply for a new EIN, right? Not a great position to be in, but it is an option. So if you apply for a new EIN, once that actual LLC is formed and you use the actual legal name, you can get that second EIN, and then for the first EIN that now is assigned to an entity that doesn't really exist, you write a letter to the IRS to have them cancel that first EIN. So a couple of options here, how to fix or remedy this, but I'm going to go back to my initial advice here. Even if it takes 2 weeks to form an entity under state law, do not apply for the EIN until you have confirmed that the entity is created, you've got the actual name, and then you're good to go. So, yeah, that's my advice. So do not apply for an EIN until you have an entity, and then you can avoid all of this kind of mess down here to try to fix it if something goes wrong. So that covers it. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.